Right, good morning, everybody. Trevor, can I just ask you to keep an eye on who's attending and just mute as they come in, please, whilst I introduce. Thank you. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth day of the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children Week. This session is around supporting your child with anxiety and self-esteem. We've got Tom Elmer and Claire Elliott, who are from LPFT. My name is Mandy Radley Mitchell. I'm the Audit and Policy Officer for the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, and we are hosting this week for you all. So if you could just move on to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. So just to help with sort of a technical side, if you could make sure you are have your cameras and your microphones off. Please feel free to use the chat or the hands up function throughout. Tom is going to be delivering the presentation and sorry, everyone's coming in now and confusing me. And the chat function will be there as well. So answers will be provided throughout, as well as some question and answer time potentially at the end. If you are struggling with the sound, then Teams does have a subtitles function. So with the buttons along the top or at the side of your screen, there are 3 dots that say more. If you click on that and language and speech, and then show live captions. Obviously that listens to what's being said and does show up. There is a few seconds delay as that is done. So potentially the PowerPoint slides won't quite match up to what's being said. So just as a warning, as something that came up earlier in the week. We are recording the session. We appreciate how busy you all are and really grateful you could join today, but there are many more people who were not able to join us, so we'll be watching this potentially afterwards. You will get a copy of the recording, the slides and some further resources, hopefully by the end of the week. And just a warning that this week, some of the webinars do have sensitive topics. You obviously know yourself best, so please feel free to take time to sort of have a moment. If you feel like you need to leave the session for a couple of minutes, please feel free to do so. We will not be locking the session down, so you will be able to access that. So thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Tom.
Lovely. Well, thank you all for coming this morning. It's nice to see so many people here, really. So as I said, my name's Tom Elmer. I'm from Lincolnshire Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. So I'm kind of linked to Healthy Minds Lincolnshire, MHST, and to a lesser extent the kind of the CAMHS teams. My position in it is be more lower level kind of emotional well-being side of mental health. So we don't use as much kind of diagnostic language. We're very much into a message of kind of normalization of kind of common emotional well-being concerns. And I'm joined today by Claire, who is watching in the wings. It's my glamorous assistant. I think they're probably, because there's a lot of content to get through today, you might have some questions on the stuff I'm talking about at the time. Pop them in the chat, and Claire will either answer as she can as we go along, or we'll kind of reflect on them all at the end, really. It'll just be if I'm trying to get through the content and answer questions at the same time. I know myself, I will not get through the content in time, essentially. There'll be a few open questions as well during the session, just to kind of hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. You can pop them in the chat. Also, sometimes I might sound like I'm posing an open question. That's sometimes just the way I phrase things. But yeah, feel free to use the chat as we go along. Claire's got her eyes on it, and it's my job to get through what we want to talk about today. So the aims of the session today is to better understand what anxiety and low self-esteem is for young people and how they present. We've picked anxiety and self-esteem because they're the most common issues we see at kind of the Healthy Minds MHST level. Really quite common presentations at the moment, so we thought it would be good to tackle these two today. We're going to be thinking about how we can support young people with anxiety or low self-esteem. So there'll be a mixture later on of the practical kind of techniques we can use, but also the relational approach, really. So there's what to do and there's the how to do it, kind of ways of being, ways of talking and communicating, which are really meaningful. And then at the end, we'll be exploring kind of what resources are out there and what's available in Lincolnshire to help young people, to help professionals, and to help their parents and carers. So starting off, as I said, it's common, it's really quite common in what we see in our services. But some of the more kind of national statistics on it, these are taken from the NSPC's Good Childhood Report of a general feel of kind of how our young people are doing at the moment. We've got 11% of children and young people in 2024 reported low well-being. 15.6% of children aged 10 to 15 were unhappy with their appearance, which is seen as a key self-esteem indicator. In UK, the 15-year-olds reported to have the lowest average life satisfaction in Europe. And a trend we've seen, especially over the past 10 years, is that girls are consistently reporting lower happiness levels than boys across life, school, and appearance. So about 10 years ago, girls' happiness levels were higher than boys, but we have seen a decrease over the past 10 years. Well, when we're considering, before we kind of go into anxiety and low self-esteem, when we're thinking about the general mental health and emotional well-being of young people, I'd like to ask you guys and to put in the chat, what do we think is in the mix at the moment? What is impacting our children and young people in 2025? What are the issues? What is it they're contending with, really? What do you see as professionals, as parents?
We've got a couple in there already saying about social media and the influences of that.
Absolutely.
Oh wow, it's moving quick.
I thought it might
dysmorphia, yeah.
There's
Peer
probably been or will be
misogyny.
sessions from this week on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, toxic masculinity, technology, friendship groups, peer pressure, bullying, social media, and AI. Yeah, cost of living.
Yeah, that's a newer thing.
Snapchat comparison, peers, school exams, parenting related issues, disruptive behaviour in classrooms, global wars on the news. Yeah, I don't like that bit. I have to say it makes me a bit anxious. Parents, lockdowns, that's had a massive impact on referrals as well. Domestic abuse, FOMO, I get that. COVID, yeah, it's still impacting us, isn't it? Those COVID years.
And I suppose every kind of, new generation has their own unique set of challenges which their parents' generation didn't deal with. So it's a new challenge for parents as well. And yeah, we're dealing with some really unusual stuff at the moment, aren't we? The invention of AI and how kind of publicly used it is. I think when we think kind of body image, body dysmorphia, things like that, a few years ago, it was looking at kind of unrealistic models or photoshopped models, but now it's potentially looking at something what's not even human, never was human in the first place, and it's a completely just generated image, which is really quite bizarre. But yeah, tons of great ideas there, guys, as I saw them coming through, largely matching up with some of the main things I kind of thought off the top of my head. I thought obviously school for most children there's going to be pressure associated with that. General kind of academic pressures can lead to stress and anxiety. We can have issues of bullying, social exclusion at school, and also kind of the relationships with peers and kind of sometimes the natural challenges which come through just forming relationships or even fallouts. Then we have, all the kind of issues which come with natural development of a child. So we know as children grow up, their emotional regulation skills are still developing. Anyone with teenagers is probably really seeing that. We talk a lot about emotional regulation in this day and age, and it's kind of there's maybe the perception that this generation of children can't regulate their emotion. Well, children have never really been able to regulate their emotion particularly well. It's all part of growing up. The older we get, the better them skills become, but it's to be expected in some circumstances. We've also got the hormonal changes, especially in teenage years, which can kind of intensify emotions. And I suppose the older we get, we have issues with kind of forming how we see ourselves, identity formation, I suppose it'd be called. And that will certainly play into self-esteem when we talk about that a little bit more. I also thought of generally relationships. So relationships with family, relationships with friends. We know that the more positive relationships a young person has in their life, the greater their feelings of self-worth will be. Whereas if there's strained relationships, if there's few relationships, they might associate that with feelings of rejection, which can be distressing. We also know the really positive impact of having a good social network, whether that's family members or friends. That's a really good buffer against stress, against distress. And we all know that sense of belonging really makes us feel good. Now, the big one loads of us went to almost straight away, I suppose, is we can call it technology, and we can say social media is certainly within that. I believe it may have already happened, or if it's coming up, there has been a social media AI session or several across this week. We could talk about it all day. There's so much going on there, isn't there? But yeah, I suppose that social media side, we've got constant comparison against images we see. So that's not always actually how we should look. Obviously, that's a big part of it. But a lot of the time, it's comparison about a lifestyle, how I should be living, the kind of clothes I should be wearing. We see a lot, especially in boys and I think males, this real kind of like high performance culture that anyone, anyone should really be living at this kind of like high performance, like you're an athlete level. I wake up at 4 in the morning, I'm at the gym at 5 past, and I don't come out till 9. That kind of stuff is obviously going to kind of make you kind of compare your own life and kind of routines to that. They were there we go. So AI session and misogyny were yesterday, and there's recordings which will be on the way. And then, yeah, like we said, the general state of the world. I don't know what it is, but whenever I see an image of a globe, I always think of, I think it's Billy Joel who does the song "We Didn't Start the Fire," where it's essentially a list of troubles in the world, and you could update that. At the moment, you could probably update that song every week with the amount of news stories we hear. A big part of that is because we're in a world where we are constantly exposed to news and world events and what's trending online. It's very hard to escape that, really. We know all sorts of things which are going on all around the world, and a lot of the time it can be really quite scary and really quite distressing, not just for young people, but for parents, carers, for professionals as well. There's going to be an element of that kind of buzzing off of us, really, and children are going to kind of pick up on that. So I think what is important, obviously, there's loads in the mix, but a really good way of almost kind of thinking about these is what we call the circles of control. So thinking about what is actually in what can I control in my life? And then the next circle would be, what can I influence? Well, I might not have full autonomy over it, but if I speak up, could it change something? And then finally thinking, actually, what's not in my control at all? We have very little sway. We have no control over kind of what government spending is, wars breaking out, what we see in the news. It's very hard to control kind of how other people react as well, things like that. So actually focusing on what can we do can almost spin a positive when we feel that there's so many issues in there. So if we're thinking school, it might be, I can't control that. It's exam season and exams are coming up. but I have some control over how much I revise and how much kind of self-care I do at that time. So I'm doing my best. We can't control how others behave, but you can choose how you respond. And then I suppose with the world events, we can't control what's going on, but we can talk to someone about how we feel about it. So generally kind of talking things out is a really good emotional outlet, really. Okay. When we're thinking definitions, so when we're actually thinking about anxiety and self-esteem, it's really good to have some, the NHS approved definitions, but it's also quite useful to talk to young people and actually find out what they mean when they say I'm feeling anxious, or they maybe say, they don't have any self-esteem or anything. Actually talking about them to what it means to them is really important. But if we were to have some definitions, these are the general kind of NHS-y ones. Is that anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear, that can be mild or severe. So with anxiety, a lot of the time when we all the time when we dig into anxiety, it's a fear or worry that something bad is going to happen to us, to someone else. Generally, something bad's going to happen, and you're going to come to harm. Is really what anxiety is all about when we really kind of dig into it. The behaviors we see during anxiety might not indicate that a lot of the time, but generally speaking, it's rooted in a fear. And a lot of the time our behavior is to maybe avoid that fear, and that can make things worse. Our self-esteem is more about the opinion we have of ourselves. When our self-esteem is low, we tend to see ourselves and our life in a more negative and critical light. So yeah, self-esteem is very much based around kind of core ideas which we have about ourselves or we have about the world. And when we have these core ideas, a lot of the time they determine the way we think, the way we behave, and the way we emotionally respond to things. And we'll talk a little bit more about where core ideas come from, and how we can kind of challenge some of these kind of negative thinking styles. But essentially, it's when we have low self-esteem, it's usually because we've got something called distorted cognitions, which basically is just thinking. So it's when our thinking is distorted, it's not always rational, it's not always seeing the truth, really. What is important, though, is to actually have a normalizing message in here as well, because there are times in anyone's life where they feel anxious or they experience low self-esteem. We know these become more, if we don't find kind of coping strategies, or if we don't kind of change what's going on, they can become experiences which impact our kind of day-to-day life. They strain relationships, they keep us up at night, they stop us getting to school or behaving correctly at school. So they can have an impact. But I think it's really important to actually normalize that anxiety and low self-esteem can impact anyone. It impacts a lot of people at some kind of point in their life. Young people are naturally going to feel anxious about things like exams. If they receive bad news, if there's kind of a strain in relationship or a loss of a family member, quite naturally their self-esteem is going to come down. So we need to actually kind of normalize it whilst we can as well. I'm also just thinking, when we're thinking definitions, when we're thinking anxiety, when we're thinking self-esteem, we're maybe thinking a lot, especially in this day and age, of kind of the normalization of quite medical language. So maybe not even that long ago, people would say, oh, well, I'm always feeling worried. I'm worried about this. I feel worried all the time. And that's what we see as anxiety. But we do use more kind of medicalized language now. And a really good thing about that is that we've really encouraged people to talk it out and actually explain how they're feeling and talk about impact on their life. What isn't so easy is actually knowing how to respond. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And I think it's important to note that we're in this world where we really promote talking about mental health, but sometimes that's actually really scary. And with certain skills, we maybe need to practice a bit. And so us as kind of parent carers, professionals, can meet these issues in a really kind of calm and well-balanced way. So we're going to start off. The first two sections of this session are going to be thinking about actually kind of recognizing anxiety. So I'll go through what someone with anxiety, how they might behave, what they might think, how they might emotionally respond. And then I'll kind of give you the key, what we call psychoeducation, but it basically means what's actually going on in the body when that's happening. So an open question to you guys. Well, how do we know if a young person is feeling anxious? What do we see? What don't we see? Is it always obvious? What do you think? What are the little clues that someone's anxious?
They've got withdrawal, avoidance. They tell you
behavior.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell you that their legs are shaking, nausea, snappy. Laura says that her daughter bites her nails aggressively. They could be fidgety, snappy in mood, asking lots of questions, overthinking, unsettled. They might fidget and not wanting to go out. Very emotional over the small things, requires reassurance, unable to process, irritable, chewing clothing, overly quiet and retreat, snappy, worry in their belly, become withdrawn, shaking, heart palpitations, sweating, stomach. Chelsea's son bites his lip and the inside of his mouth. They can't give you a straight answer to a question. Yeah. They want to hide, feel unsafe in normal situations, not eating well, crying, changing routines, picks at skin, doesn't know what's wrong.
Think the
outbursts.
But doesn't know what's wrong and not being able to explain it. A really important point. Well, all of these are really important, but then one's definitely kind of rang a little bell in my head. And we will explain why that's the case in a few slides' time. We're seeing a lot of, it looks like as they're coming in, I'm seeing a lot of kind of withdrawal. I'm seeing a lot of avoidance, worry, and funny tummy. Yeah.
Yeah, Louisa's put affected sleep. That's really common.
Yeah, and sometimes a lot of the more physical symptoms we see, they can impact other things. They can impact kind of how people view themselves as well. So actually, when we're thinking about anxiety and self-esteem, we do know if someone experiences anxiety for a long time and it's not kind of challenged, over time that can actually impact their self-esteem and will reduce their self-esteem. Because it kind of works in a bit of a feedback loop of our behavior and then how we feel about ourselves. Okay. So some of the common ones which we might expect to see is really increased heart rate. We might see and to be honest, it can be really quite distressing when we see young people almost look like they're kind of struggling to breathe, really deep breaths in, really quick breaths in. We know when we have anxiety, maybe we've got specific worries which we're thinking about, we can stay up at night thinking about them. There's this weird thing that kind of, I don't know, sometimes we can live such busy lives, especially, kids and teenagers, where they see loads of people, they do loads of things. They're always quite kind of plugged into things and talking to people. And then when it comes to some time for yourself and you sit back, that's when a lot of kind of intrusive, worrying thoughts can come in. And that can impact how you sleep. And obviously, we know if we don't get enough sleep, there'll be impact the next day when we can't focus at school, or a bit snappy with mum and dad, or a bit snappy with our friends, teachers. So yeah, the physical sensations can impact kind of the social life the next day as well. Having a dry mouth is a really common one. We've got getting very hot. Sometimes you see very kind of red-faced children when they feel anxiety. And yeah, as we've mentioned, for trembling, wobbly legs, wobbly hands, feeling faint, feeling like you're going to pass out is really common. Sweating more than usual, needing to go to the loo. These are all really common ones, and a lot of ones you've given as well are, there's tons of potential physical sensations which can come from this. A lot of the time we're all very different in how anxiety impacts our physical sensations. But generally speaking, as kind of parent carers, we pick up on changes quite quickly. And whether that's something as kind of almost overt as heavy breathing, or if it's something a bit more subtle, I think someone said just body language, how someone's holding themselves, are they making eye contact? Do they look like they're actually engaging in when you're talking to them and stuff like that? Sometimes it's a bit more subtle. Next up, we have the behavioural symptoms, and I suppose we've covered some of them in the physical as well, because when we spoke about kind of withdrawal and stuff like that, but I'll show you some common behavioural symptoms. They might line up with young people you have in mind, or they might not. They can be really individual. But when we said that anxiety is often rooted in fear, one of the main behaviours we're going to see because of that fear is avoidance. Isolating ourselves, staying away from these situations which cause a lot of anxiety. And when we're pushed towards them situations and we're not ready for it, we can become angry, we become snappy. Potentially, when we're really trying to avoid stuff, we go to unhealthy coping mechanisms, drink, drugs, the short-term kind of ways of escaping how we're feeling. We can also become attached to a safety object or a person. You can get really attached to maybe a parent or maybe a friend when you need to go to a certain lesson at school, because in the moment they bring us a short-term feeling of safety. We might also see a young person who really, really struggles. Let's say they really struggle at school, but maybe their school teachers don't think that's the case because they get on with everything, because they're polite, because they're working really hard on their work. But that can actually be anxiety as well. Maybe that tricky behavior comes in when they get home. But when we're thinking anxiety, we're thinking of a lot of avoidance, and we're thinking of something called safety behaviors as well. So safety behaviors are actions that people use to basically prevent, reduce, or manage their anxious feelings in situations which they feel are quite threatening. So that could be going along with a certain person or having a safety object, because they provide some sense of temporary relief. But in the long term, when we have this kind of safety behavior or person, so a safety behavior could just be never going to something which causes them stress. In the long term, that is actually going to reinforce the anxiety and prevent people from realizing that they can actually cope. They can manage a situation which they're quite worried about. They might not be able to manage it perfectly. And there's always going to be situations which essentially cause anxiety and stress us out. But if we don't go to them, we'll never actually find where our kind of natural limit is. So we need to maybe think as kind of parents, carers, professionals of, are there any times where actually you're meaning well, but are you actually stopping that young person from seeing if they can cope a little bit longer in a stressful situation? Making kind of baby steps, very small steps into exposing someone to anxiety in a safe way is something we do in kind of Healthy Minds level. We sometimes, if there's certain situations someone's really kind of frightened of, with a safe and slow and planned build up to that, they learn that they can actually cope with a lot more as we try it. This isn't to be misinterpreted as if someone has kind of additional sensory needs and their behavior is a result of actually finding a setting too stimulating, slowly building them up to that environment probably isn't going to work. if there's sensory needs. So I think that's an important thing to kind of remember. So in terms of the cognitive, and cognitive basically means thinking, and kind of the thought patterns we have. So we'll often be thinking things like, what if the worst happens? What if I get hurt? What if I die? Something really extreme like that can be a cognitive symptom. We might be thinking like other people are judging us. We might have the idea that we're just going to fail. We're not able to do this. We might think we'll be trapped in a situation. We might think we're quite helpless. And we might overestimate a threat or underestimate the ability to cope. And the emotions we see, we've probably all seen these. We've probably, at times in our life, experienced these ourselves as well. We might become embarrassed, might become fearful. We might get angry. It might be easier actually to lash out at people than it is to just say that you're really scared. That's really quite common. Can be with boys and girls. We certainly see that. Essentially, where all these responses are coming from, so whether it's the emotional response, whether it's the thinking patterns we have or the behaviors we engage in, they all ultimately come down from the model of the fight, flight, freeze response. So essentially, the fight, flight, freeze response is our internal alarm system. When humans were a real primitive species, when we lived outside, when we were kind of nomadic, when we were hunting kind of big mammoths and stuff like that, we needed to respond to threats. We needed our body to act in a way to run away from predators if they jumped out in front of us, or to actually try and fight something, or to actually kind of hold still and hide. It makes sense to do that when there are real kind of predators and threats in our environment. And there might be times in your life where maybe you've actually, or your young people have actually been in a life-threatening situation. That could be that feeling you get if you're someone who drives and maybe you pull out a little bit too late, but you do get there and you think, oh gosh, well, that was risky. You'll feel your body slowly enter that fight, flight, freeze. You'll feel sensations in your stomach. Your hands on the steering wheel might get a little bit jittery. And you're thinking, you might start catastrophizing and think, well, that would have been so awful if I didn't make that. These are all natural responses. Our brain sends basically adrenaline rushing through the body to basically kind of big ourselves up. So if we needed to run away from something or fight something, we could do. And in theory, yeah, that's really helpful if there's a real threat. But in the modern world, we quite often see a lot of kind of day-to-day experiences as threatening as well. So stresses in our lives these days, they aren't mammoths jumping out or big tigers jumping out of bushes. They are social pressures. They're exams for children, they're relationships, they're arguments with friends. They're how they're perceived in kind of judgmental school environments. They are seen as the threats these days. And all our body can do is go into this sense of fight, flight, freeze, and it sends that adrenaline through our body, and we can become really quite heightened and agitated, almost in kind of an over-the-top way, but that is all our body can do. We might also want to consider, so fight, flight, freeze is kind of the traditional response, but we also have the fawn response. This is a little bit lesser known, but probably a lot more common with children with neurodiversity. It basically involves trying to please, appease, or accommodate others to reduce the chances of conflict or rejection or distress. So we might see that where a young person appears like they can cope with school, then they get home and the behaviour comes out because they've been essentially masking all day. So that's important to remember as well. Moving on now to low self-esteem. And I'm already looking at the clock because the time's flying by. But when we're thinking about low self-esteem, the physical sensations, they might be a little bit different to our anxiety responses. What do we see in children with low self-esteem? What have you guys seen? Or maybe, you know, what do you guys know about low self-esteem? How can that impact our body? What does that feel like? You can pop your messages in the chat like you did before. I'm sure it'll all come zooming in.
feeling inferior to others.
Absolutely, yeah.
Worthless, not good enough, feeling lack of worth, not caring for themselves properly.
Absolutely.
Constant comparisons,
Yeah.
negative thoughts, constantly checking mirrors, self-harm.
Yeah.
Refusing to participate.
Yeah. So when we're experiencing a lot of these negative thoughts about ourselves, so we've got them, you know, someone mentioned the words worthless. So if we're thinking a really low opinion of ourselves, our kind of behavior and physical sensations are going to reflect that, really, aren't they? So we might feel it in our body, that we might just feel tired all the time. And that's essentially because when we're constantly criticizing ourselves, that can be really quite emotionally draining. And that in turn will lead to physical tiredness. However, we might also be feeling tense or restless. And this might be where we're worrying about being judged a lot of the time. We're feeling quite actually anxious about other people judging us. If we've got an idea that we are worthless, we are going to think other people are going to think that, and that can be quite stressful. But we also know when people have low self-esteem and they think lowly of themselves, they tend not to actually kind of care for themselves as much. So we might see a change in hygiene. We might see a change in actually when, you know, they don't see much point of going to school the next day, so they'll stay up all night, and they can, you know, impact their sleep cycle. They might not think about actually, if they've got such a low opinion of themselves, well, I'm not going to brush my teeth this morning. And sometimes with low self-esteem, it kind of creeps in. And sometimes it all of a sudden there's someone who really just isn't caring for themselves. But it may have started with just actually, I'll skip my shower this morning. Don't need to do that. So it's something to keep an eye of, and just be aware of, really. But yeah, slump posture, lack of eye contact. When someone isn't confident in themselves, it absolutely shows in body language. The behavioural, like many of you have said, there's withdrawing, there's disruption or attention-seeking behaviour, there's reluctance to speak up. The cognitive side of it, so with self-esteem, it largely stems from the cognitive symptoms, the ideas we have about ourselves. So you might hear lots of actual kind of labelling of themselves. I'm useless, I can't do this. A general thinking style that they're not good enough, other people are better than them, that inferiority someone mentioned. So we're certainly seeing these things. I'm not quite sure if that was meant to be on speaker. I didn't hear what it was either way, but you can pop it in the chat if it was something important, and I'm sure Claire can respond. And the emotional symptoms, feelings of guilt, shame, sadness, irritability, what we kind of expect. So if anxiety stemmed from this kind of survival response, low self-esteem comes from the way we kind of think about ourselves. It all kind of starts with a core belief, a negative core belief, usually about ourselves, but sometimes about the world as well. Where do core ideas come from? Well, it can be early life experiences. It can be repeated messages from family or friends. So if someone's bullied, over time, they're going to have a more negative core belief about themselves because they repeatedly hear the same message from their bullies, which is really sad, but that's what happens. And also we're thinking kind of societal influence, so thinking about social media, but also just single points of, you know, a one-off traumatic experience can create a negative core belief. So there's lots of ways that that belief can develop, but it's maintained because we'll enter situations which are triggering, where essentially the young person will enter a situation and think, well, that is almost justifying why I have that core belief. I didn't put my hand up at school, and that's because I'm not smart. So it kind of goes back in that sense. So if that core belief was I'm not smart, and the trigger situation was I didn't get 100% in a test, that's going to come back to themselves, and their emotional response is, well, I feel rubbish now because I'm clearly not very smart. But we maintain that core belief through certain behaviors. So that behavior might be actual kind of rumination on that, the fact they didn't get 100%, and a lot of self-criticism. So we're missing a lot of the facts a lot of the time when we have distorted thinking. So I like to call it the gloomy glasses. It's almost like the idea of seeing the world as how it is, and then putting on a pair of glasses which sees it all in a really negative way. That actually things are all rubbish and this is all my fault. It's almost like putting on glasses and seeing the world in that way. That doesn't mean it's just a perspective. It means that it actually impacts how we think about ourselves, the thinking patterns we have, and how we behave and kind of emotionally respond as well. So that's kind of the main kind of psychoeducation between them. And now, more importantly, is for what can we do, the practical. When we're thinking of worries, one of the most important things you can do, and one we always do with young people, is the idea of actually sorting our worries, helping them work out whether that's a practical worry or whether it's hypothetical. So a practical worry is something that's happening in the here and now, and that young person they have some control, or they have some influence in that situation. So there is something they can do, but they might just need a bit of guidance from parent carers or professionals. The worry might be hypothetical. So this might be where they've maybe, spent too much time on Instagram, heard too many negative messages in society. They've got more hypothetical worries about the world. So that could be, what if something awful happens? What if a war is declared? What if mum doesn't make it home from work? Hypothetical worries where there's no actual kind of truth in there. It's purely hypothetical, but that emotional response is really real. So actually helping young people identify practical and hypothetical worries is really useful. For Litlands, we can use the worry tree, where we essentially, at the start, we think about, well, what is it you're worried about? And then asking that very simple question of, can you do anything about it? So if it's a no, that's a hypothetical worry. And we leave this, a lot of the time, we can leave this until our worry time, and we'll talk about that in a second. If it is something we can do, we essentially help them problem solve what they need to do. Teenagers will probably going to have more autonomy in this. Litlands will need a bit more support from their parents on that. So for worry time, the idea of worry time is that across the day, there might be lots of little worries which kind of pop into our heads. What we want our young people to do is to somehow record them. So it might be in the notes section on their phone. It might be on notes. Obviously, if you're in school, you might want to kind of let the teachers know, well, we're doing worry time. So if you see them writing things down, that's essentially what they're doing, so they don't get called up on it. So we write our worries down as they come in, and we tell ourselves, well, we're going to think about these later on. So we record them. We distract ourselves afterwards. So we might bring in maybe a breathing technique or a relaxation technique. And then later on in the day, we engage in worry time. So we usually want to do worry time at a time where that young person won't be disrupted, that as a parent carer, you actually have time to support them if need be. And we don't want to do it before bed because that can make them ruminate. But essentially in that worry time, they look back at all their worries and they think about, did any of these come true? Was it as bad as I thought it was? Is there anything I can do about them? Is there anything my parents, teachers can help me do with them? And after that, we'd bring in another kind of relaxation technique to kind of let them worries go where we can. For them worries, where we can do stuff, we essentially follow problem solving steps. I'm not going to go through all of them now because we're quite limited for time, but it's thinking about problem solving in a structured way. It's focusing on the problem. It's basically brainstorming solutions, finding the best one and rolling with it. Litlands will need help kind of planning this out. And sometimes that can be actually written down. With anxiety and low mood, there's absolutely space for kind of grounding and breathing. There are tons of different grounding and breathing techniques. A lot of the time, we need to explore lots of them before we can actually find the one which works for us. There's certain ones like square breathing, where actually that's really good to do quite covertly, because look around the room you're in, you'll see dozens of square shapes. So it could be the laptop or the phone you're looking at. And you essentially, with your eyes, you trace around that square and you breathe in for counts of 4 and you hold it and then you breathe out for 4. So we know with breathing, it basically activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically all about rest and digestion. And that helps basically reduce that fight, flight, freeze response. Slowing the heart rate down also slows our brain down. So the thinking, the more rational side of our brain, when that's gone out the window because it's been anxious, it can actually slowly come back in. We know breathing and grounding essentially is really good at interrupting either anxious thoughts or negative patterns of thoughts which we have about ourselves. So they're really good for both anxiety and low self-esteem. As parents, carers, as professionals, for low self-esteem, probably the best thing we can do is really support our children to identify thought traps. Now, these are the patterns of negative thinking we can all engage in. I'll get them all up. But essentially, these are some of the different ways our brain works in a distorted way. So we might have all or nothing thinking, where we associate, let's say, a test with, well, that's going to determine the rest of my life. If I fail, I'm going to fail for the rest of my life. Overgeneralizations about situations, about people. Discounting the positive, really, really common. You get 70% in a test. That's a really good score. But maybe you're thinking, oh, well, there's someone who always gets 90%, and you've discounted the actual real positive work you have done. Catastrophizing, saying what they should have done, a lot of labeling, blaming yourself for things which actually were nothing to do with you. So we need to help them identify when they're thinking them. So we can actually have them all down on paper, and maybe at the end of the day, if there are any of them kind of thoughts which have cropped up, we say, well, does it fit any of these? And we can use stop and think questions. So we can ask things like, well, is this 100% true? Or actually framing it with someone else. So saying, well, what would you say to a friend who thought this? For some reason, the minute that thought's not associated with you and it's someone else, they think about it completely differently. Because if they've got friends, they think of their friends in a positive way, and it will show that they're not showing themselves the same kind of kindness, really. So really, a lot of our job is kind of putting up, in a very respectful and nice way, is putting up a mirror and actually challenging a lot of these kind of thought traps, which we all fall into. They're really good. I do enjoy the stop and think questions. There's plenty more out there as well. These are just a handful of them. When we think about the building of a positive sense of self, we want to look at actual skills they have, building skills, learning, all really good for confidence as well. However, I think in certain settings, we might think that it's a bit like that quote Einstein had, where it's about the ability of a fish to climb a tree. Certainly in really high pressure kind of academic settings, loads of people think they're not very smart because they're not the smartest, when really a lot of their skills lie elsewhere. And sometimes they're not academic skills. Sometimes they're really good communication or people skills and stuff like that. So having a list of character strengths, what we've done before, we've got this list up and worked with young people and said, well, what ones can you associate with? And it might be, well, actually, I'm quite a hopeful person, or I'm quite a cautious person. I think caution is a really good one. So you might think, oh, well, I'm really worried. Well, actually, you might just be quite cautious. That's a good way of reframing it. And you can pick a few of them and you can ask the young person to rate that out of 10. So do they think they're 10 out of 10 in kindness? Or is there a little bit more they can do? If they're a 4 in one area, it's not about getting to a 10, but it might just be, well, what can you do just to bring it up a little bit? So that's a really kind of nice one. And then also with both healthy habits, we have the 5 steps to well-being: connection, being active, learning, giving to others, and being mindful. There's a massive evidence base that all of these will raise your self-esteem they can quench feelings of anxiety. And again, if you need to get some kind of ideas of where to go, we'll actually ask a young person to rate out of 10 where they feel for these as well. So they might have tons of friends and they might be really active, but actually they don't put any time into learning any new skills, or they've not got that kind of special interest hobby which we can just kind of dig into a little bit more. And also mindfulness. We could have done a full session of mindfulness because there's so much evidence to back it up. But a lot of the time with teenagers, especially teenage boys, they kind of scoff at the idea of mindfulness. They might think that it's kind of all about yoga mats and deep breathing and stuff like that. Mindfulness can be done in a minute, and it can be something really small, just like really focusing on the taste of your crisps at lunchtime and things like that. If you've not dipped your toe into the world of mindfulness, definitely look into it, find some techniques, and try them out essentially. When we're thinking about the relational, and I do apologize, I'm very aware I'm trying to get through a lot here. But when we're thinking about the relational, we're thinking about how to approach and communicate with our young people. One really good kind of model to think of is when we see young people in distress, we quite often want to reason with them straight away. If you see someone acting maybe in a quite challenging behavior, or is really, really kind of isolated and withdrawn, one of the first things we say is like, well, what's wrong with you? What's going on? And trying to just understand it straight away so you can help and kind of problem solve. But the majority of the time, when someone isn't kind of, when their thinking brain's out the window through either self-esteem or anxiety, we really need to work on kind of bringing back their thinking brain. And to do this, we need to help them regulate. So instead of trying to reason first, we try to regulate with them first. In terms of regulation, a really good resource is Lincolnshire BOSS regulation toolkit. That has tons of ideas about either essentially stimulating someone up or bringing them down. It thinks of things like real kind of kinetic activities. It's a bit like if someone's really heightened, actually running around outside and going on the trampoline, that's a really good way of regulating them. It gets that pent up energy out. Whereas if they're really withdrawn, you might want to actually think of something which stimulates them. Do they need something just to do with their hands? Is there an activity you can put in front of them? So we're thinking about regulating, we're thinking about doing things with them, and then we're actually talking about kind of what's happened, what's going on. And, you know, if that is challenging behavior you've had to help them regulate with, there's still absolutely a time to say that's not acceptable. But actually saying it's not acceptable and then kind of repairing that relationship afterwards, but tomorrow's a new day, this afternoon's a new period, let's go from there. That can be really good. When we're thinking, I think I've kind of said my points there, really. But yeah, actually model naming emotions, remembering that our little ones don't always have the words to describe how they're feeling. So actually, I wonder if you're feeling quite worried. I wonder if you're feeling angry. That's what it looked like to me. To me, that looked like this. Is that right? That can be really helpful. Validation and connection, really important points. I think you'll all know the importance of validation because there'll have been times, possibly quite recently, possibly in the last week, where maybe you've opened up to someone or you've told someone how you're feeling and you basically get like oh, that's rubbish, unlucky. You really feel it. It's really disheartening and upsetting, isn't it? So when we're thinking validation, it's not just about saying the words, it's about actively listening. If you're pushed for time and a young person wants to talk to you, it's really helpful just to say, oh, I've only got 2 minutes, but what's up? Actually saying how much time you've got before going can be quite helpful. But making that time, creating a safe environment where they can talk to you is really important. We don't want to actually just tell people not to worry. We can take a constructive approach. Let's figure this out together. Sometimes rating emotions or using kind of image cards as to where someone's feeling can be quite helpful. But a really good one with validation, and a lot of you possibly do it already, but when someone has almost kind of explained to you or tried to tell you their emotional distress, actually summarizing it for them, saying to them, am I right thinking this is how you're feeling? And telling them back what you've heard. Not only is that really validating for them, but it gives them the opportunity to correct you, to make sure you're on the same page as them. So you might notice sometimes if you've ever worked with a therapist or something, a lot of the time they summarize what you've just said, and it's really validating, but it's also a really good way of actually connecting with a young person. And then building self-worth. So actually, we're not just praising the outcome. So we're not praising the test result a young person got. We're praising them for revising and trying their best and getting there. And it's the idea of actually sometimes showing up is enough. If it's a really stressful situation for them, but they at least tried it, or they at least went, well, that's a success. That's what we should be celebrating. So we're making them feel valued beyond kind of traditional kind of achievements, really. We also know for self-worth, being part of a group is really important. So you might want to think about, well, what's available for my child? Is there an after-school club? Is there cadets? Is there Cubs, Scouts, Guides? Is there things like that you can tap into? Because they can be really good as well. I was going to end this section on a really good film clip from Inside Out. I don't think I'll have the time to show it though.
I'll pop it in the chat, shall I? I'll get a link.
Yeah, if you can get the YouTube link, and
Yeah.
certainly watch it after this session, and it will really challenge it. Well, it certainly challenged me when I first saw it, because as parents, carers, professionals, quite naturally we want to be problem solvers. We want to solve that problem for our young person, because then they won't feel sad anymore. When actually sometimes, and it's not always comfortable, we need to sit in that sadness with them. We need to validate it with them. And a lot of the time, that's the more helpful thing we can do. So yeah, there's an Inside Out clip Claire will share with you. But in the final few minutes, I'll run through kind of what's out there. For self-help, for stuff young people themselves and you guys as professionals and parents can access, what we've got might be quite helpful. So Claire and I have recently remade a lot of online workshops. So these cover various different kind of emotional well-being topics. You can go through them at your own pace. It's a bit like what I've done today, but a lot more kind of child-friendly language. Explaining symptoms, explaining kind of the reasoning behind them, and telling you some things which might help, things to try at least. And we've got quite a few topics there. They're not just for young people. We've got some parent workshops in there as well. So there's one on supporting anxiety for children who also have additional needs. We've got an emotional regulation one, which is really quite interesting. And then we have the more normalized ones like exam success and things like that. We do also have. I was
going to say, I've popped a link for that in the chat. And if they scroll down on that, that's our opening page for Healthy Minds. If you scroll down on that page, there's a list, a link that will take you to the online workshops.
Yeah. Similarly, we've got a podcast. Again, tons of sessions for children about different things. We've got ones on summer holidays. They range from kind of things to talking about kind of anxiety and worry, but then talking about the benefits of sports. There's also quite a few parent ones as well, which can be quite handy. In Lincolnshire, Kooth is available for young people. It's essentially used on your app, on your mobile. It offers immediate, free, safe and anonymous support all across the year, self-help tools, community support. There's no waiting list. You simply download the app and sign up and you'll have full access to it. For the cases where you might think you possibly need more professional advice or a referral, in Lincolnshire, whether you're a parent or professional, I'd say the quickest way of getting to support is the Here For You line. You can get advice, general advice, or if we need a referral, we can talk about that as well. Also, there's online referral options. So young people aged 13 and over can make an online referral about their emotional well-being or mental health. But also there's a parent-carer online referral option as well. So yeah, the Here For You line, you can Google it, you can call the number. Either one will get you to the referral pages, or the number will be there for you. Overran by a minute. I hope that wasn't too much. It has been recorded. We'll send out the slides as well. And thank you for your thoughts as well. We will be here for, if any, I'm not sure if there's been questions asked as we've gone along, or if anything like that, but we can certainly hang on a few minutes if needed.
I've put a variety of links and things in the chat that will take you to
Claire
the podcast, and it will take
the chat.
take it to the podcast. I've even put the self-referral information in there as well. And the This May Help website is brilliant. It's got loads of videos on there. So as a parent, that's really good. So I put the link in there for that one. Lots of everything from like helping you, supporting you around gaming, mental health, all sorts. There's loads of videos in there, so it's a really good one to have a bit of a look at for support and links in there.
Lovely.
No, brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time. That was it was absolutely brilliant. And as a parent, I got so distracted by listening to you, I forgot to put the feedback form in until the very last minute. So for those of you that are still here, if you could fill that feedback form in, that was absolutely great. And if you do have questions, pop them in the chat and we'll make sure that there is answer provided to you. But yeah, thank you again, Tom and Claire. Yeah, absolutely incredible session. I'll stop the recording now. But yeah, thank you for your time.
Thanks.